Hello, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so delighted you've joined me this evening, and I've got a stunning story for you that you're really going to enjoy. So let's get started. But before we do make sure that you subscribe to my channel. I'll be so glad if you do. Let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I was working in the police force in the Smoky Mountains close to Pigeon Ford and the town of Gatlinburg. In those days it was even less built up than it is today. With the tourism industry booming so much in recent years, there's been a lot of heavy construction development here. Even so, there is an ubiquitous amount of untouched, unexplored wilderness in this part of the world, and that really could be a home to a plethora of different creatures, not even recorded by science, that could be living in our forests, mountains and valleys, without us even being aware of them. It was in the early 80s when I had my first Bigfoot encounter, which was one of the most terrifying experiences I ever had. And I never in my wildest dreams imagined that I would share my story with anyone. But it seems that I'm finally eating my words. I remember receiving a call out to a property near Laurel in the middle of the night, and the voices at the end of the phone were so incoherent, I couldn't hear what they were saying. It sounded like a woman was hysterical about something, but what, I couldn't fathom. I decided to drive out to the property to see what was going on. I was greeted by two sisters in white nightgowns, both speaking at once in terrified voices. "Calm down," I said. "I cannot hear a word you're saying. You need to speak one at a time, otherwise I'm not going to hear either one of you." We were sitting by a fire in the living area. We were just talking and catching up with our homework, and we heard this thunderous noise. It sounded like someone heavy or big outside our house, and we heard this huge sneeze. We looked up at the window and we saw this hairy, chunky-looking creature staring at us, and it had bright red eyes. He looked so black and dark and big, and we were terrified. He made the most horrific growl, like nothing I've ever heard before. It was truly terrifying, officer. "Where was your mother when this was going on?" I asked. "Oh, she's upstairs. She's fast asleep. She suffers from insomnia, you see, so she takes these heavy tablets so that sometimes it is difficult to wake her up." "I did try," said the younger sister, "but she was too groggy to really listen to us. She just rolled over on the other side and continued to sleep." "That's not good," I said. "You really do need adult supervision with a scare like that. Are you sure that no one is playing tricks on you?" "No way," said the older sister. "Officer, this thing was real. I know it was." "Where did it go?" I asked. "Well, we went out with the rifle," said sister, "and we saw the black thing running away. Officer, you can't believe how fast this thing was. It was like looking at this huge blob of black that was here one minute and gone the next. It was that fast." "I will look over your property to see if we see any signs of activity, or we'll see if he's around. Are you sure it wasn't a bear that you were seeing?" "Absolutely sure, officer. That face was most definitely not a bear's." "No way. I know what a bear looks like." I was in the process of inspecting the property when the two girls started screaming and running towards me. "Our mother has vanished. There's no sign of her anywhere. I think that thing, whatever it was, that creature, has kidnapped her." Now I was also frantic, just like the girls, and I tried to remain level-headed and calm. The mother had vanished into thin air, and I needed backup at once. So I immediately called the police force and asked for more people to come out to the property. I decided to run into the wooded area of the property where I was sure the thing had more likely escaped to. The woods were a perfect place to hide, I thought. Yet if the children's words could be trusted, I had no clue what or whom I was chasing. I did have a fleeting thought that this might very well be a prank that the mother was involved in as well, and her disappearance was all part of a big party trick. I brushed those feelings aside, telling myself to take this case seriously, and if it did turn out to be a hoax, well, at least that was that. But I had to take this seriously, even though everything about this case seemed incredibly far-fetched. I have to say the woods were menacing that night, and even though I had my torch with me, the ambience of the forest was cold, dark, foreboding, and unfriendly. I almost felt like an intruder in the forest who was not welcome, and I felt as if there were eyes on me, and it was a very intimidating feeling. The forest was so large and the leaf litter so deep. Where was I to start looking? It was like being caught up in a maze and not knowing which way to turn. Suddenly I saw a white feminine arm sticking out of the leaf litter. It caught my attention because of the whiteness of it, and it was against a large walnut tree. I rushed over to the body, half expecting it to be dead, but the woman was just in a deep sleep and was lying there so drugged it was impossible to wake her up. Those were some sleeping pills, I thought. I tried to shake her, but she just groaned and rolled over and continued to sleep. What was she doing here in the middle of the forest in this unconscious state? Had this dark creature that the girls claimed to have seen really been responsible for this? I truly had no answers to any of my questions. Suddenly I heard a sound that was so haunting it put the fear of God into my whole body, and I was so freaked out I actually shat my pants. I'm ashamed to admit. That was the level of my fear. It sounded like this loud banging of horses and carts galloping and racing towards me at a thunderous speed. Then there he was, this creature, larger than life, standing before me, and he made no attempt to hide himself from me. Whatever this creature was, he was covered with dense black mop-like hair and stood at about 11 feet tall and weighed at the very least 1,000 pounds. And the smell that he exuded was the sulphurous rotting egg kind of odour that made me physically want to gag. With 2 huge strides, he parked his gargantuan tree trunk-like legs in front of the woman in a protective stance. And then I knew by the way he was guarding his prize that he had indeed been the culprit who had kidnapped the girl's mother. The creature growled at me. He curled back his thin lips to reveal a set of very large human teeth, and it seemed that he was expecting me to fight him for the woman he had kidnapped. Well, that was the impression I got. I would not have stood a chance against this creature, and he knew it too. I could see he was almost daring me to challenge him. I was not even aiming my rifle at him, because against this creature it may as well have been a toy pistol. He eyed my trembling hands to see if I would use my pistol on him. And I knew what it was, and it really did not worry him at all. It was like there was a smugness to him, because he knew he had all the trump cards, and come what may, he would be the ultimate victor. I stood there feeling totally helpless, vulnerable and afraid, not knowing what my next action was going to be. I knew he was waiting for me to make the next move, and he was eager for me to make it, so that we could fight each other. That's what he wanted. I could feel it in my bones. I did not want to give this creature what he wanted, because either way, I was a dead man. I knew it, and he knew it, and we knew it. So if there was any time to be courageous, now was the time, and now was the moment. I suddenly remembered that I had a can of pepper spray in my pocket, and I quickly retrieved it. Suddenly I sprayed the creature's eyes with a fine, fiery mist, and the creature coughed violently and spluttered and let out the most horrendous scream that was just too terrible for words. He was clutching his eyes in pain and fled through the forest, sounding like a herd of trumpeting elephants, and all the while he continued to scream. I just stood there, hardly daring to believe I was still alive. I was shaking so much with terror that it took me a while to compose myself. Then I finally lifted the woman up in my arms and carried her home, planting her safely back into a cozy bed, much to the relief of her 2 grateful daughters, who were so glad to see their mother alive. "What happened?" they asked. Did you see the monster? Did you see the creature we saw? Do you know what it was?" I told the girls what had happened in the forest, and as they listened to my story, their eyes just grew as wide as saucers. "Officer, you could have been killed. You took such a risk just for my mother. Thank you so much. You don't know how grateful we are." Should we tell our mother?" asked the older lady. "What happened to her?" "I wouldn't tell her," I said. "Your mother's already having trouble sleeping. Can you imagine if you told her that she was abducted by a hairy monster? Maybe even her sleeping meds wouldn't work for her anymore. It could just be so traumatizing for her." "You're right," said the younger sister. "We shouldn't tell her. That might really just be a very bad idea." Suddenly we heard my backup team of police officers arriving on the scene with guns at the ready. "They're a little late," I thought privately. "Are you going to tell those police officers?" asked the sister. "Are you going to tell them what really happened?" "Most certainly not," I said. "I'm a police officer, and telling my fellow officers what happened tonight will make me a laughingstock. I'll just tell them that you got scared by a boisterous bear making a nuisance of himself on the property." "Is that all right with you?" "That's fine." I visited the girls' rural home over the next few days just to make sure the creature had not made another appearance. It seemed he was really well and truly gone, and I imagine his pride was hurt. The girls told me on the night that the mother had been taken into the woods, she had accidentally taken twice as many sleeping pills as she should have, which would explain her comatose state. I gather she also had a nightmare about being stolen out of her bed by a big hairy beast who carried her into a forest. Little did she know how real her nightmare had been, and I gathered it terrified her so much, so I'm very glad she believed it was just a bad dream and she didn't know the real truth. It was only in the late 90s that I realized the creature I had seen was a Sasquatch. I did have another encounter, one in Knob Creek near Pine Grove. I was driving along the road and it was about 7:30 at night, and I saw this huge black bipedal creature staring at me through my window as she raced across the road at lightning speed. I know it was a female because she had breasts, but it happened so fast. I did not get to observe all the details due to the swiftness of her encounter, but she was definitely a Sasquatch. This creature did look non-aggressive and curious compared to that hideous beast I faced in the forest one dreadful night many years ago. I hope your listeners, and both you and your listeners, enjoyed my story. I really loved that story. I found it very fascinating, and certainly you did encounter a terrible, terrible Sasquatch. I mean, you do get awful ones that are incredibly violent and incredibly aggressive. I've heard people say that the look in the Sasquatch eyes was, "I want to kill you." And then there are people who have had encounters with Sasquatch that are so benign and sometimes just so peaceful and almost loving. So you do definitely get two types of Bigfoots. You get the gentle kind and the aggressive kind. It does seem that the women are a lot more gentle and very much more, if they see a child or something, they're likely to respond in a very protective way. It's not always that way with men. But I just did enjoy the story. I thought it was a very interesting story and an incredibly interesting encounter. And I did like the way the Sasquatch just sounded like a herd of trumpeting elephants going through the forest. I can imagine that. Those things are very heavy and they weigh a ton. So I can imagine that they do sound monstrously big. Anyway, until next time, good night and goodbye.